Greetings, friends and family. We're back for another installment in our study in the Word. I'm not going to be able to post to TikTok or Facebook for a little while because I'm offshore. I'm on an oil rig, but fortunately I have a room to myself. So, yeah. But I'm going to do a couple videos while I'm gone, and then when I get back, I'll post them. But at any rate, picking up where we left off last time, we're going to read verses 13, 14, and 15 of Romans chapter 11. This is a continuation of Paul explaining Israel's future salvation, even in the midst of their present and current utter and complete rejection of Jesus Christ. And so he says, "For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am an apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify mine office, if by any means I may provoke to emulation them which are of my flesh, and might save some of them. For if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world, what shall be the receiving of them be but life from the dead?" And so again, we covered last time verses 11 and 12, I believe it was, where he said, have they stumbled that they should fall? Meaning, is their separation from God complete and permanent, total, without hope? That the nation of Israel is completely, the people group as a whole, not the geopolitical state, but rather the group of people, the ethnos. That's what that word nations is usually translated in the New Testament, is the word ethnos, meaning people group, not necessarily geopolitical borders. But at any rate, he's talking about Israel's future salvation as a people group, as a whole. Now under the old covenant, they as a people group were saved because they were in covenant with God through the sacrificial system. In the new covenant, now folk, including the Gentiles, you and I, those who are non-Jews, are saved by faith in Jesus Christ. By grace are ye saved through faith, and not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. Ephesians 2, 8, and 9. But at any rate, now if the fall of them, verse 13. I almost read verse 12 again. We covered that last time. Watch the previous video if you don't know what I'm talking about. He says, "For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify my office." In other words, even though I am an apostle to the Gentiles, because I was sent to the Gentiles by God after I had received, rejection by my own people. God changed my direction, so to speak, to focus on the Gentiles. And that was kind of the agreement that Paul had with Peter and James and John in the book of Acts, that Paul would go to the Gentiles. Peter would primarily focus on ministry to the Jewish folk. If by any means, verse 14, I may provoke to emulation them which are of my flesh, those which are my kinfolk, my heritage, people that are genetically related to me, because Paul was a Jew. And he said, if by any means I may provoke to emulation, meaning that I might stir them up to want to follow Christ because they see what God is doing in and through me, that I might provoke them to emulation which are of my flesh, and might save some of them. That even though as a nation they've rejected Christ, as individual people, they each had the opportunity to accept Christ. And so God didn't just wipe them out and say, you know what, I'm done with y'all, forget it. He's dealing with folk on an individual case-by-case basis now, not Israel as a whole, as a nation. Now that's going to come later on down the road, but we're dealing with what Paul's writing to the Roman church right now. As he's writing, for if the casting away, verse 15, for if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world, what shall the receiving of them be but life from the dead? Meaning that if the casting away, God's casting away the nation as a whole because of their rejection of the Messiah, it basically paved the way for the gospel to go forth to the nations, to the Gentiles, to the pagans, to the heathen, to the Greek, whatever you want to call them, because the Bible calls non-Jews in the New Testament many different things, the heathen, the pagan, the nations, whatever. They're just non-Jewish. It doesn't mean they're less than. It doesn't mean they're any less loved by God. No, not at all. And it doesn't mean the Jews are superior in any kind of way, simply because they have a genetic relationship to Abraham the patriarch. Abraham's the father of us all who have faith. But at any rate, he says, for if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world, in other words, that because they were in a sense cast off because of their rejection of Christ, and that paved the way for the birth of the early church and for the spread of that early church into the areas and regions and reaching peoples that were non-Jewish. If that happened because of them being temporarily, as a people group, as a whole, as a nation, put aside, what will be more, what more benefit will there be when they as a whole are reconciled unto God? Now, in the meantime, like I said, God is dealing with folk on an individual case-by-case basis based on their response to the call of the gospel, whether they accept it or reject it. God deals with people on an individual basis. But as a whole, as a nation, the Bible speaks about during the end times, and I don't want to get into a whole bunch of eschatology and, studying the book of Revelation and talk, at some point during, the Battle of Armageddon, when 2/3 of the remaining Jewish folk in Israel are basically annihilated by the Antichrist, the remaining 1/3 will call upon the Lord Jesus Christ and will, receive him, and Christ will come and rescue them from from complete and total obliteration, which is Satan's goal. That's the Antichrist's goal, is to completely wipe out the Jewish people, because if he can do that, then he can make void the promises of God. But that ain't going to happen. Now that's basically a rough, explanation of the whole thing. And I don't want to get into too much detail, but, what Paul is saying is, for if the casting of away of them be the reconciling of the world, meaning because they rejected Christ and God pushed the nation, the people group as a whole away because they rejected him as a people group, and now is dealing with Jews on an individual basis. If that paved the way for the reconciling of the world, meaning, people, the non-Jews, what will be the receiving of them be but life from the dead? It'll be such a miraculous, fantastic move of God that the world system and the people in the world will have no choice but to acknowledge that God is real, and that God has brought this miraculous deliverance to a people who the world looks at as cast out, as just completely, I don't even know the right word for it, but it's going to be such a miraculous thing when God ultimately brings restoration to the nation. And so I'm out of time. I'm going to stop right there. We'll pick it up next time in verse 16 and go from there. Thank y'all for watching. Love you. Bye.